Good morning. I don't think I need a mic, but thank you so much for having me. I just really want to welcome you to, number one, the 2025 Winter Conference for ACA, but I also want to welcome you to this symposium. This is kind of really important to me to make sure that we are looking at the things that are where our clients, that our inmates, everyone has places that are acceptable. I've served on the Commission for Accreditation for about 16 to 18 years. I can't remember how many years, but I did that, and I was really amazed by facilities. And, you know, I'm come from community corrections, so institutions, not that they were foreign to me, but it was just like, they just seemed like old structures, and I couldn't understand how we would accredit folks when their facilities were not, in some cases, very archaic. They were very archaic. And then, just fast forward to 2 years ago, I built a facility for my organization, and it was just a 350-bed facility. But through that process, I was amazed by the things that I learned. I learned more about grease interceptors and sewage and all those kinds of things than I care to know. But I saw how important it was. And also, I know that we can't just knock down everything and rebuild it. I know that. And so we have to figure out a way to do that. And I think today's symposium will really show us some ways in order to do that and to keep people safe. So I just want to welcome you again to the summit and have a really good day. Thanks.
Good morning. All great ideas start with a ripple in the water. It's not the number of people you have, it's one person or two people that just recognize we've got to make a change in how we're moving. And that's really what this is about. Where the Evolving Spaces vision and idea started with is some of the incredible leaders you're going to talk to and hear from today, Texas, North Carolina, our leaders in this industry. But I'm preaching to the choir when I tell you we've got probably $5 billion worth of deferred maintenance in correctional facilities across the country, and I'd tell you that's probably a low number. Federal Bureau of Prisons Director Colette Peters in her budget hearing announced $3.5 billion in the federal system. So you take a system like Texas, North Carolina, and other places, we're in the B's, we're in the billions. As a director of a correctional system for 5 years that had not paid attention to maintenance. And that's not an accusatory statement. It is, we're often not funded for it. We're often not listened to when we start getting hit about the head and ears around conditions of confinement. A lot of it is around the physical plan. I've worked with some wonderful people that are helping us design new evolving spaces. My colleague Robin Timmy, who I worked with Falcon to build and design, and he promises me will be built in Baltimore City, the new Therapeutic Treatment Center, a $900 million facility that will really just look at how corrections moves, how we safeguard the space, how we maintain the space in the long term. So this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. But sitting with my colleague Brian Collier, who I believe now, Brian, you're under federal supervision for air conditioning? Yep. And as a old security director, we're going to have to think different. We're not going to build our way out of this. So how do you, when you walk in as a design engineer, saying, listen, we need to bring air into that prison. We need to bring tempered air. I'm cautioned not to say air conditioning. Tempered air into an environment that gets 100 plus degrees. As a security director, I'm going to have to say, exposed ductwork, we're going to have to figure out a way that we do secure exposed ductwork, because I doubt that you're going to be able to, in some of these prisons that are nearly 100 years old, how are you going to bring it in from the rear or enclose the ductwork? And that's just an example of how we're going to have to think differently about this issue. Personally, I want to make sure that our government affairs individuals, it's on our list of 6 items we want to influence on Capitol Hill, which is more money for capital construction for you, more grants, more budgets for our facilities to do some of these projects. Again, we're continually being hit about the head and ears legislatively on conditions of confinement and things to fix. We need help, and we need to understand how evolving spaces, how we're going to work in them, retrofit them, and move through them. So again, this is a ripple conversation that we hope brings knowledge, new information to the industry. For all of you that are either working in this environment, you're an exhibitor and selling and designing in this environment, creating partnerships moving forward. That's how it started. It started as an idea and setting with my colleague Steve Carter, talking about, what do we do? Using our committees, how do we embrace this? So again, that's just some of the background of where we're at. So let's start our ripple and make a difference. I am pleased to introduce our two moderators for today that are going to take it from here. We met with them where did we meet? Was it Nashville? So Nashville to here is 4 months, 5 months. It's a quick turnaround. I met with them there and I said, this is what I want to do. It's what President Robinson and I would like to bring to the conference. And they turned and burned and got it done. So I appreciate the work of getting us moving forward. Tony Schaefer, the chair of our ACA Facility Design Committee, and Donald Henry, vice chair of the ACA Facility Design Committee. The floor is yours. Thank you very much for getting us together.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Don Henry, Vice Chair of the committee, Facility Planning and Design Committee. I'm also the Managing Principal at Urban Architects. Over 40 years of correctional experience we've brought to improving conditions for both the staff and for the people in custody. Our committee is formed of facility managers, agency directors, and design professionals, all with a dedication towards improving the infrastructure of our correctional facilities and making them better. And so we have we're pleased with our membership and our committee. We're always looking for new membership, and we would love to have, if you're interested, please see Tony and I. And we can talk about having you join in with us in Denver. And with this, I'll let Tony take over.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm honored to welcome you all to this very important symposium. I'm passionate about it, about facing our aging infrastructure within the prisons and jails. We're faced with a pressing issue that not only impacts the people that work and live within the facilities, but it also impacts the broader missions of safety, security, and rehabilitation. Our facilities were built decades ago, and they weren't even designed for the current needs of today. Moving forward, it's important that we are innovative and we balance fiscal responsibility with our future needs. Again, I want to thank each and every one of you for attending today and bringing your expertise and your commitment to this conversation. Going forward, I think it's going to be very important. Your contributions today and what we do today, and as Director Green stated, the ripple that we start, this is going to impact the policies and the practices of tomorrow. So again, thank you all very much for being here, and I'd like to go ahead and get started. And we'll introduce our keynote speaker, who's Steve Carter, and I just pulled out my phone to talk a little bit about Steve. You can tell by the gray hair, he's got a lot of experience in his life that he's went through. And I can't tell his entire life story, but I'm going to touch on some points that I think are important. But Steve Carter, he's the founder of CGL. He founded that company over 50 years ago. He's been with ACA as a member of ACA for over 40 years. He spent some time as the committee chair for the Facilities Planning and Design Committee. So he's very interested in this committee and what we're doing. His experience is in urban planning, And he's also one of the founders of the International Corrections and Prisons Associations, ICPA. And he's also serves on the North America board for that organization. So Steve Carter is very passionate about corrections and the buildings that we're building and what we're using and the spaces that we have. So with that, I would like everyone, please give a round of applause for Steve Carter.
Not quite sure how I got here, but I did respond to a request from the committee to introduce the topic to you today. I have had a few years of experience in seeing what other states and counties and jurisdictions are doing in the field of developing conditions of confinement. Today is my 18,375th day with CGL. It's been quite a nice run. It has taken me to many, many parts of the world and to meet a lot of people that have taught me a great deal about it. I have no practical experience in corrections, and that's going to be pretty obvious in my discussion. I do have a little bit of experience in helping governments look at what they might do to improve their conditions of confinement, and I am grateful for all of those opportunities. I know it's dangerous to use PowerPoints, but this is after breakfast, not after lunch. There will be a lunch served later on, and we will be doing some physical training exercises after that to make sure you're awake. But there's coffee still here. It won't bother me if you get up and go get coffee. I'd like for you to return, but feel free. And we'll talk a little bit. Then we're going to have a panel here that really are the experts about it. But I want to go through a few things with you this morning in the PowerPoint that really struck me. Evolving Spaces is not just about temperature control. That's a major asset that we need to have for our staff as well as for those who are incarcerated. But it's more than that. So I want to go through a little discussion with you this morning. And forgive me for looking over my shoulder. I don't have a monitor in front of me here to look at my slides. But I want to look at the elements of comfort with you. What does human comfort mean? And ultimately, we'll talk about what does it mean for incarcerated persons. Is there a different formula that we need to use for people who are incarcerated as opposed to those of us who are in here now? So, basic question is, should confinement be comfortable? There are a lot of people in my state, South Carolina, who believe that there's no such thing as comfort in prison environments. And I suspect that many of you have run across that in your fields of work. And then how do we address comfort? What methods and materials and means can we use to actually address it? And where do we draw the line in comfort and what we would provide inside of our incarceration environments? And are there any applicable examples that we can look to say, aha, so-and-so got it right, and let's just pattern ourselves after that, important one. And then what role should ACA play? Director Rob Green addressed that side of it. And I think, and I know Tony and Don share this with me, that there is a role for our committee to play in going forward with whatever may come out of the Evolving Spaces Symposium today and any in the future. So I want to ask you, there are just a few basic questions. And these have to do with your personal comfort. Did you have enough to eat? Was it adequate for you? A big part of our comfort. You feel safe in here. Pretty big space. There's not any armed security here, but do you feel safe here? Are you able to hear us? You're going to hear a lot of people speak today. being able to hear what we are saying in a normal voice is an important part of human comfort. About the lighting, I've got it right at me here. That's a little uncomfortable, but nonetheless, I hope the ambient lighting in here is okay for you. If you are inspired to take any notes, I think the lighting level would be okay. And is the chairs. I had asked for lounge chairs for this session, but I hope these will be comfortable enough for you here. All of these things are factors that relate to it. And it's the temperature about right in here. All contribute to our level of comfort. So I think human comfort is influenced by a lot of factors, as we know. Humidity in the air is an important one of it. If we were holding this discussion in August, I suspect that the humidity level would be significantly higher than it is now. I think the temperature would be quite a bit higher than what we are having right now. But humidity is really an important aspect of how comfortable we feel. How about airflow rates? There's not a lot of air movement in here now, but I think the ventilation system is probably okay. That no one's going to begin to feel too stuffy as a result of what we have in here. Radiant temperature of the surfaces around you. Now, we're okay in here right now, but my oldest son has his doctorate in environmental architecture. Taught at Parsons in New York for many years. Is now on the West Coast. He's working with me on something in the Philippines. And in the Philippines, they don't condition any of the spaces. Some of the staff-related spaces, obviously the infirmary and the clinic space, but the rest of it is natural ventilation. And he said, we are not orienting our buildings correctly. And what's happening is we're creating hot boxes. And it's something that all the architects and engineers here know about, but it is something that has to do with human comfort, is the radiant temperature that's generated by the buildings that we design and build. Another area there is clothing insulation. There's been so much advancement made in the sports field to design high-tech clothing that helps you breathe better, lets the temperature, keeps your body temperature in control, all of these types of things. Maybe it's time that we look at the uniforms that we're using in corrections and to say, are they the best we can do in terms of that? Because clothing really contributes to the level of comfort that we have. The metabolic rate, if we were to invite everyone who's attending in the ACA to come into the room, we would cut off the ventilation system. It would not be long before this space would start to heat up. Can you think of a parallel in our prison environments where crowding, the level of crowding that we have been enduring for years now, and what that is doing to body temperature and what that does to those that are around it? And clearly, body temperature is the most important factor in determining our comfort. We cannot get comfort in whatever environment we're in if our body temperature is either too low or too high. And these are things that can be addressed through design, but also through practice. And that's what we want to explore today. The noise level, it's not too bad in here. The acoustics are not too bad in here, but you've all presented in spaces where the reverberation is just incredible. It comes back at you, everything you say. And the ACA, a number of years ago, the committee tried to pass a standard on reverberation time. And we tried to make it as simple as we could so that auditors could actually go in and measure reverberation side. We did get a little something in the standards about it. There's a lot more to be done on that, because I don't have to tell you, all of you who have worked and been in prisons and designed engineered prisons know that noise levels is one of the major factors that contributes to the attitudes of both staff as well as the incarcerated people. And then lighting, the ability to have some control over the lighting is another important factor. So I ask you this question. If you're comfortable, then we're good ways along in looking at your needs and how to solve and accommodate your human needs. And we all have needs. We get up in the morning having certain needs that we want to be met during the day by the decisions that we will make and by the environments that we will inhabit during the day. So, does the space and the ambience contribute to your feeling of comfort? I mean, stop for a moment and ask yourself, what spaces do I feel the most comfortable in? What spaces agitate me? What spaces bring kind of fear or at least concern or anxiety in there? And we know that space contributes to that. And will that setting have any impact on how I'm going to respond to people during the day? I know my architectural friends out there believe that, they practice that space does have an influence on human behavior. And the director referred to the Baltimore facility, nearly $1 billion. Frank Green and his team are right here. They know a lot about that. They are working with us, with Robin Timmy, on trying to make that space meet certain levels of comfort for staff as well as for the incarcerated people. So, we then ask ourselves, what elements and levels of comfort really should be available during confinement? Be willing to bet. If we all left here and went out on the street and started asking people on the street, what level of comfort should an incarceration person have? Be prepared. The general public probably feels that they're going to prison for punishment and not as punishment. And that's a huge distinction. But how far can we go? How far can we push the envelope in there in providing some basic levels of comfort for incarcerated people? And a lot of what we're going to talk about today through the various panels of people who are really specialists at this is going to be getting at just that. What can we do? And who's best qualified to define what those elements will be? Is it the design community? Or is it the construction, the engineering? Is it the operating community? Is it the legislature? Is it the governor's office? Who defines what are adequate levels of human comfort in a correctional environment? We have the ACA standards. We have the physical plant standards of the ACA, and they actually quantify some degrees of metrics that we can use in the planning and design of correctional facilities. Are they adequate? Are they enough? Are they really getting at the real issue? Is not just temperature, it's a lot more things than temperature. So who really is best to do that? And should we not address human comfort, human conditions of confinement and incarceration more broadly than just temperature control, just air movement, just lighting level? Isn't it a more holistic approach that we should be taking when we define standards? Now, all of you are going to be familiar with this. You've had it somewhere in your education, I'm sure. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm not going to give a tutorial on that. I'm not qualified to give it. But you know this, and you know that it first starts out, we first got to meet the physiological needs. We've got to have water. We've got to have sleep. All of those things are at the base of the pyramid. In these, and if we got that, then we need to move on to security. Do I feel safe in the space? What could be done in the space that would make me feel more safe? And then after that, we get into some of the things that are much more difficult to quantify, and that is, will my relationships with others be improved or not based on the space that I'm occupying, based on the space that I have been assigned if it's in a correctional environment. How am I going to respond to that on the relationship side of it? And then ultimately, I think, even in the correctional world, we are talking about making those who are incarcerated feel like that they have purpose. At the end of the day, most of them are going to be released. Or they're going to be released with a purpose. And are going to do that. And I do believe very much that the environment over the years will have contributed to that. And the levels of comfort that we've tried to provide will do that. And then ultimately, they are going to go back to the community. And we hope they go back to the community self-actualized, that they will be responsible decisions. I don't want to make it too far of a stretch here, but I do believe that the human needs for those who are incarcerated have to be looked at, have to be addressed, not just as solving one thing, but looking at it much more holistically. We know that there are a lot of factors that affect comfort in the prison environment. Age is one of them. Gender is another one of them. We respond differently based on gender. The level of health that a person has during incarceration is another major factor of the comfort level. In prison, the clothing worn, I mentioned that earlier. I come from a state that prides itself as a cotton producer. I don't know whether cotton's the right material to have for those incarcerated. And I don't know whether the uniforms that we require officers to wear in a correctional environment are right. But we ought to look at it. We ought to say that we recognize that clothing contributes to that comfort level. And the type of activity and the intensity of those activities, of course, will be a factor in that. Access to food and drink, we make certain that that happens in our prisons. There's no question about that side of it. Acclimatization, how well they can adjust to the environment. I don't know if we have enough data that says, based on age, gender, the levels of health, how well that they respond to the environment. How well do they acclimatize to the environment they've been given? And then later today, right after our panel, Dr. Timmy is going to talk a little bit about the psychological side of it. As a clinical psychologist, he's much more capable at doing that. But all of these factors are a part of what goes on within the correctional environment, and you know that. So we got a pretty big challenge ahead. Director Green's already said we've got a lot to do. I'm really happy that ACA at this point in time is re-examining just where we stand as an organization. Because you know a lot of people use the ACA standards as guidelines. So we do have a significant challenge ahead because we have a lot of correctional environments that barely meet just the bottom tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. These images you're all quite familiar with. The one in the middle is real. I mean, you know, this is California. You've been in all of these types of environments. What level of human comfort do you expect might exist in that? I had an opportunity to be in that environment, and I spoke to one of the incarcerated persons. I honestly didn't go very deep into the bunks there. He was on the perimeter. I said, why are you here? And he said, well, you know, I committed murder. And I said, how you like this environment you're in? He said, mark my word, I will kill somebody in here. And so there is something to the environment and the challenges that we have ahead of us. We don't have a lot of money in the correctional system to solve all the problems that we have. So we're going to have to take it a step at a time. And I think that's what we want to try to do. Now, again, you all have been in environments like this. there's some level of comfort that exists there. One on the top left there, I think I've got a point. Yeah, this one is out of the Utah Women's Facility. First thing that hit me when I was looking at that one is, which one of these inmates are going to go to the top bunk? Should there even be a top bunk in a women's facility? Some of the others in there, this is the United Kingdom. One thing that I liked about working in the United Kingdom, they have operable windows, they have big windows. There's a lot of stuff outside the windows sometimes. They throw stuff out there, so there's a constant cleanup that goes on. I recognize all of that. But what I liked about it is they have duvets on the bed, they have curtains on the windows, and the windows are operable, of course. That's a different kind of a cell. Then we have what we probably most know about are cells like this. Then Okanagan, British Columbia, again, a double-bunked cell, Washington, D.C., the Correctional Treatment Facility. So Israel, they all have some levels of comfort that either the jurisdiction has provided or the inmates have developed. And I really like this one from California. This is an older gentleman, been in for a long time, and he has adjusted to his environment by recreating his environment. He was given permission to surround himself with a lot of things. So I think that's one of the things that we have to ask ourselves about. Then in the association spaces or the day room spaces, one of them that I liked a lot, this is in the Correctional Detention Facility in Washington, D.C., and the inmates took it on themselves to paint the space. Paint the doors a different color, to apply leaves, trees to the glazing that's in there, to try to make the environment as normative as they possibly could. But most of our day rooms are fairly empty spaces until the inmates get in there, and they spend a huge part of their day in those environments. So are those day room and association space environments the right environments? So how do we move towards transformation? Should we even move towards transformation? Is that just a big word that we use and we go on building what we have been building of it? Those of you in here who've been to Norway and looked at the holding facility, I know that Robin has been there. I know that Beverly's been there. This is one of the murals that's on the Hymax yard there. And they gave the artists the freedom to express on the wall whatever the artist wanted to say. And I'll let you decide what the artist was saying. Now, I haven't looked at that picture. I've been there. I've walked around it. Say, what did he have in mind when he said that? You notice that the chain is still attached to his leg, and he's trying to heave the ball over the wall there. He might be onto something in trying to tell us that transformation is not going to be an easy process for us. From Scotland area, a women's facility that's underway right now in design and construction. But you look at some of the things that are in there. The lighting is a little bit different. There's a much larger window that's in there. The furniture is a little bit more normative in appearance in there. Those are these parts of transformation. This is the Las Colinas Women's Facility in San Diego. A couple of things in this one that are worth noting. It's a dormitory facility. But each woman has their own cubicle. That's getting at one of the principles there of personal safety and personal privacy in there. That was provided at pretty low cost, actually, to do that. Then in the association space here, fairly normative furniture, but the amount of natural daylight Now, I know that's hard to do in existing facilities. How do we create more daylight in spaces where we just forgot to include windows in there? But all of this is a part of the transformation. When I was in Kuala Lumpur, I was facilitating a symposium there a number of years ago. I got introduced to their robot. South Korea was going through using robots in prisons. Now, we all say, ha ha, he, this ain't gonna happen. But I can almost guarantee that it is going to happen. I don't know whether they're going to be correctional officers or not. That's what South Korea did. They used a very different kind of robot, and it wasn't terribly attractive. But robotics is changing so much. And Tony Turpin can take me on this, but I think that within the next foreseeable future, this guy will show up and do some maintenance. Can easily do it. That's all programmable. That's all possible. I think it's going to change. It's going to be a part of the transformation that we're going to need to address. And one of the things I asked the South Koreans was, so how does that impact design? And they said there's a couple of ways in there. We've got to have charging stations. We got to have places where Elmer can actually go plug in. And I don't know if the company is here on the floor. I haven't been to the exhibition floor yet, but last year they were here. They had the little robot that was running all the way around the exhibition halls. And they're doing things like carrying out trash. Some of them are capable now of moving food carts for those who are in that serving in the day room area. But we need to be aware that this is coming for us in the future. And how does that affect human comfort? So do any of these describe a more comfortable room? Do we have a snowball's chance of giving any of these? These are real places. The top left, that's Halden. Yeah, they push the envelope way beyond what we're probably capable of doing. But the Federal Bureau didn't do bad. This is 20 plus years ago. That looks like a fairly normal environment, a fairly comfortable environment. In Prince Edward's Island, William Head Island in Canada, I took the commanding general from the Israeli prison services to this facility because he said, I want to see something different. So I took him to this facility, and he saw what they were doing there, what the Correctional Services of Canada were doing. And he said, we want to do that back in Israel, and they did. And the facility that was constructed in the Golan Heights. In Australia, I like the way the window's treated there, the capability of having walls where we can mount things on. That to me says comfort. That's a step towards recognizing that. And these others across the bottom here, this is the Shakopee Women's Facility. Bunks on the floor. Simple thing to do there. This is a Northern Ireland facility. Again, what you see in all of these is much more natural light that's allowed into the cells. And that's, I think, an important part of it. These are the cubicles that I was mentioning that are at the Las Colinas. And each woman is given that. And you know, one of the hierarchical needs was the ability to relate to others. And we did a post-occupancy evaluation after this facility was open. And they have a range of cell types there, from single cells, double cells, to dormitory. And we asked the women, have you lived in many of the other cells? And because that is now a sentenced facility and not just a pretrial facility, they said, oh yeah, I've been in all of them. Which one did you like the best? And we were kind of blown away and slightly disappointed that they said, oh, well, we like the cubicles because at 2 a.m, if I've got a problem, I've got somebody I can relate to, I can talk to. It's an important part of it. I worked on something in Alice Springs in Australia many, many years ago. where the design requirement was that the inmates go out to an outdoor courtyard in the middle of the night, because that was a part of the indigenous people's culture, that they could actually leave the space and go out, go outside. I'm not suggesting that that's going to work in the American prison system, but it is how other jurisdictions have looked at things like achieving human comfort through various design approaches. And in the day room spaces, there's a whole variety in here. These are quite comfortable spaces. From Canada, it's primarily the use of color and furniture in there. In Colorado, it's all about natural light coming into that facility. Another one in the northern Arctic of Canada for mainly indigenous people. And again, is the materials that are there that I think are contributing to that idea of comfort. There are 44 states in the U.S. that have some legislation that has to do with temperature. And we're going to, most of the rest of the day, we're going to address temperature. 44 states essentially saying not in the inmate living areas. And going through some of the things that I've said about the levels of comfort and what makes us feel comfortable, that's a pretty tough assignment for directors, for wardens, for architects and engineers that are trying to do that. And you can guess where they are. Most of them are in the Sun Belt states. 3 of them really are represented here this morning, and when the panel comes up here in just a few minutes, we're going to get into it. What are they doing about the temperature levels in their facilities? And again, all 3 states are in the Sun Belt states. We know it has captured a lot of the national news and certainly the local news about the temperature levels, and we're going to hear about that a great deal more. So I'm just going to stop here and say, any comments, anything you want to add to it? We're going to get a panel of experts here. I don't pretend to be that. I am going to ask them a few questions. But anything that we ought to add to this now, or do we wait till as we get through the day? I just want to make sure that if there was anything burning that jumped out at you, that we could give you a chance to say that. All right, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I want to. Well, I'm finished yet, though. All right. Thank you very much, Tony. You all know who this is. You all know what he did. You all know a lot about his life, what he did. I had the opportunity to be working on something in South Africa about the time that he got out of prison. And I never did get to meet him personally. He was down the hall from where we were working. But he made quite a contribution to our correctional community as a lived experience. And that's why we have the United Nations minimum rules now. We don't pay a lot of attention to the UN minimum rules, also called the Mandela rules, in the United States. But they do get at some of the things that I've been talking about here today. They don't quantify it very much. Maybe that's our job, is to blend together what ACA is doing, what the United Nations minimum rules are doing, and see if we can't come out with something that truly does address some of the issues of human comfort. And what is the proper level of human comfort to provide in our incarceration environment? All of us want to wake up every day and say, I've got a purpose, I've got a reason, there's a mantra that we go for. One of the things that he said that honestly I remind myself of many times is that to see the soul of a society, look into its prisons. And so you've all been in prisons. Do you think that it's an adequate and accurate reflection of the values of our society? And if not, we need to start. And I think a symposium like this is a way that we can actually get started to identify the things that we can change. So Appreciate your attention, and I will invite the panel to come on up to the stage now. Thank you. Here, so I can see you guys. Oh, weird. Is the mic working? Yeah, I guess it is. All right. Well, I warned you that we were going to have a panel here this morning that are far more expert at this than me. And so I'm delighted to have that. I will just quickly go along and tell you who they are, and then they're going to introduce themselves in the discussions that they're going to have. Director Collier is the director of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and has some very specific ideas for us and what he is doing in Texas right now. Tony Turpin is with CGL, proud of being with CGL. He has worked for many years as warden in several facilities in the state of Georgia and knows firsthand what it's like to be the person in charge of the running of the facilities and what environment means for that. Chrissy Call is representing the state of New York. The commissioner unfortunately had a commitment right here at the end, so she's from the facilities side of it, and she's going to talk about that. Todd Ishii was, until recently, the Secretary of Corrections in North Carolina Department of Corrections, and I hope is enjoying his retirement so far. Only a couple of months maybe to get used to it. And then you've met Don Henry before, practicing architect in the state of New York, and he's going to talk about sustainability and what it means to us as we look at design. We're going to start with Brian Collier talking about what Texas is doing. Thank you very much, Director.
Thank you and good morning. I've got a few slides, but I'll be fairly brief, but I just want to give you a little bit of a picture of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, just so you kind of understand where we are. We're a system like many other states. We may be bigger, but we deal with many of the same issues that many other states are dealing with out there. And if I can figure out, let's see, there we go. Okay, so we have 102 prisons in Texas that we're operating right now. And that's a wide variety of facilities, maximum facilities, medium facilities, as well as minimum security facilities. But as you can see from the map, they're located all over the state of Texas. Texas, like many states, when we needed expansion in the 90s, prison construction was looked at as an economic development opportunity. So there were lots of towns in, say, West Texas and other parts of the state that built prisons thinking that would be the economic boon. Unfortunately, for a lot of those locations, today that's a significant challenge because staffing those prisons has always been an issue, even more so of an issue today that we deal with. But we have geriatric facilities, we have psychiatric facilities, we have 4 psychiatric special needs facilities, we have 1 for developmentally disabled, we have 1 specific geriatric, but we have geriatric beds at many of our locations. We have 2 specific hospitals, medical that we use, 1 multi-use treatment facility, and then we have 2 that we use for parole intermediate sanctions facilities. Since 2011, Texas, we experienced, our high point of population was 156,000 inmates back in the early 2000s. So by 2011, we began to decline in population and we began to close facilities as our population allowed. So we have closed 11 prisons since 2011, 2 of which we've actually reopened as we've had need to reopen since then. As we made closures, we did look at the obvious ones based on infrastructure need. If there were some that they had too high of a need and we knew that would be an easy one to cull, we actually culled some of those. But we had some facilities based on location and other factors that we closed that weren't necessarily infrastructure related. Maybe it was staffing or some of those other things that we've since worked through. We have 5 that we idled during COVID. So prior to COVID, we were sitting at 142,000 inmates. During COVID, like many states, we dropped our population. We went all the way down to 116,000. And as we declined in population, we idled facilities. And when we say idle, we basically closed the facility, but we kept enough maintenance going on so that we could go back in and turn on the lights and operate if we needed to. So we might not have invested in significant projects there, but we kept the water running. We made sure that we could go back into those facilities if we need to, 2 of which we've actually been reopened. We have 5,700 empty beds in the system. And if you look at the western part of our state, that's where a lot of those empty beds are right now. So actually in our legislative appropriation request, I leave today to go back to Texas because we start our legislative session tomorrow. We actually have a request for the legislature to consider building 5,600 new beds that would be dorms, but here's the kicker. They're actually co-located with units that we fully staff, because those 5,700 beds to a large degree are where we cannot staff. And they're in areas where staffing, despite all of our efforts, over a 30% pay increase, many of the other things that we do, we still are challenged with staffing many of those beds based on their current location. So what I wanted to kind of give you the reality of is funding for what we call our major infrastructure projects. So we don't get a typical maintenance budget for day-to-day things on a facility. That comes out of our overall correctional funding, but it's not something that's line itemed or something that we've ever had separate. But we always have had to ask for, and it doesn't make sense sometimes. You know, you have over 100 prisons. Why would you have to ask for major repair funding? But that's the way Texas budgeting was. So for decades, we've asked for and received funding from the legislature in general revenue funds or bond funds at one time to help do our major repairs. But in ideal conditions, that funding would be maybe 70, 80 million. And this chart will show you that in 18, we were around 50. That was not uncommon, but our need goes, and I was thinking when Rob was giving out the number of 5 billion, we can get over $1 billion in Texas. We have about 1.3 billion in need right now. If I could fix everything that needs to be fixed, a major repair, we'd be over $1 billion right now. That doesn't include some of the other things that we talk about, such as air conditioning, trying to improve that, and some of the other pieces, just day-to-day things that we need to work on. Our 10-year capital plan is over $1 billion. So the need has always been there, but the amount of money we got, we had to stretch it very far because many times we had to just postpone and put those on high priority projects. The other thing Texas deals with is hurricanes, major weather events, other things that happen. If we had a hurricane and we had major damage, that had to reprioritize within that 50. In 21, we received a little bit more money, but in 22, 23, something truly monumental happened for us. It won't make you excited, but it still makes me excited. And that is that in our base funding, we got $105 million. For the first time ever in our history, we got $105 million in our base. For me, why that's so exciting is it means next session, you're gonna get 105 in your base. You still have exceptional items you asked for above that, as we did last session, but that 105 is going to be there, and that's a baseline. And that was the highest amount of money we ever received from the legislature for those major repairs. So for us, that was a huge shot in the arm. But as you can see in 24 and 25, we had a significant increase above the 105. Matter of fact, the legislature gave us specifically 85 and earmarked it for air conditioning beds. We had been nibbling at air conditioning. I'll talk about that toward the end on what we've been doing in the system as far as adding beds. But they earmarked for the first time specific dollars for that purpose. But then we also had another well over 100 million just in our major repair money. As we go into this legislative cycle that we start tomorrow, we have a sizable request as well to include 114 for air conditioning. That would be another 10 to 14,000 beds, depending on how it works out, if we were able to get that funding. So we're hitting them again with another number close to 300 in overall maintenance requests, knowing that that 105 is kind of our starting spot. So that's, in the reality of what can you do, that's our reality. So we just are getting into the point, and it won't last. Roller coasters go up and they go down. But right now, Texas economic condition is really solid, and the legislature knows the need is there, so we're at a good spot. But again, those days change, as y'all know. So just look at within the system. So we have 10 units that are over 100 years old. You see the Walls unit right there. That's our oldest facility. 1848 was when the construction of that facility began, and that was the first penitentiary in Texas. 5 of our units are over 50 years old. There are 89 that were built between 80 and 97. Our newest facility in Texas was built in 97. So our newest facility, we took a tour to one of our facilities the other day with a new state representative, and I told him, welcome to one of our newer, older prisons in Texas. But in reality, that's where we are as a system. And building a facility to replace those aging out systems is not really the reality of politics in Texas, and that's not something, they don't age out. We just continue to work within those facilities that we have. So I want to next kind of highlight some of those major infrastructure projects that we do with that funding I was talking about earlier. So as you can see there, we've done improvements on putting LED lighting out. You see an ice house there, so air conditioning, but mitigating heat is a big deal in Texas. That means ice, water, all those type things are supplied within housing areas regularly. We monitor our compliance with that. So we have big ice houses where we produce mass amounts of ice to help supply those facilities. You see there a project where we're redoing the roof on an ice house. We're actually redoing that ice house as well. Pipe chase redos, water systems. We have wastewater and treatment systems that are not tied to city utilities. We have some that are, but we're on many times our own wastewater, well water system, and we operate those just like a normal community would. Boiler roofs, and y'all know that, boiler rooms are regular. Also see the fencing project below. So we started about in 2022 doing stun fencing on our maximum security facilities to replace our towered positions, and we're doing microwave on our minimum or medium security facilities, basically with an effort to improve that perimeter security, but also reduce our overall correctional officer count by about 500. And we are about 40% into that project right now, and that project continues as we do those improvements. You see housing, and I don't have that one blown up, but I know that Mr. Carter showed some slides from some of the more progressive. We have 7 units now with incentive housing, significant amounts of incentive housing, and that is where we have gone in and tried to recreate the space, cleaned up, made sure everything gets them a good starting point, but then let inmate artists come in and do murals, do lots of other things. We replaced the furniture. The TVs are much larger, things like that in the day room to make it more of a normalized housing area. We've replaced the water coolers with the water filtering stations that you see in the airport and some of the other locations these days. We've done that within those facilities, but we have 7 units where this is what we're doing. And the coolest thing for me is this is coming from our wardens. Last year, I was out walking a facility in Amarillo and I walked into an area and I thought I was at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas because the painting on the ceiling and all the way through was really well done. And I was asking the warden, who'd you talk to about this? And he said, nobody. I said, man, that's awesome. Keep doing it. You're doing exactly right. And then we talked to our other wardens about that's what we want to do. But the end game for that, it does create a significantly improved environment for that inmate population. But guess what the end game is? Those staff members that work in that housing environment, they have a much different work environment than they did before. And each and every one of them that I've talked to said, man, this used to be a difficult area to work. I love coming to work now because these guys behave. They know they have to behave in this area if they're going to stay in the area. It has significantly changed their work environment. And to me, that's the end game with many of these improvements. Not that I don't want to improve an inmate situation, but I also want to improve that for our staff members. You see doors and locks. We constantly, like most systems, have challenges with doors and locks. Not that locks don't work, but that staff don't clean them out and staff don't keep them clean, so we have inmates that can pop locks and work through that process. So that's a constant issue as well. Some of our other improvements. So in Texas, believe it or not, we don't have fire alarm systems in many of our prisons. We never had. We had a system called Firewatch. It does work, I can assure you, because we had a fire at a facility about 2 years ago, and they evacuated within less than 10 minutes. They had all the inmates out, and they were in the yard, and they got everything done. But that's not ideal, and our state fire marshal would much prefer us to have working fire alarm systems. So we have set about a goal of trying to improve that and address that, and we put $50 million toward fire alarm systems in our facilities, either those that needed to have systems that needed to be repaired and or those that needed to have systems that were completely replaced. And many of those infrastructure projects are ones that Mr. Hudson, who's in the audience, and his team lead now. Lastly, we get to HVAC projects. So air conditioning in Texas is a big deal litigation-wise as well as news-wise. We hear a lot about it. We do a lot of things to mitigate heat within the system because we don't have that many air-conditioned beds in the system. We had, if you go back to 2018, we've added over 10,000 air-conditioned beds since that time. We started basically with 30,000 air-conditioned beds. Today, we're at about 46,000. We have projects in design now that are dedicated to be done within the next year. That will get us up to about 62,000. With the funding that we're asking for in our legislative cycle, that'll put us more in the halfway mark, which is about 75,000. So we are improving, but again, certainly not looking at the entire system. Now, I've testified in front of our legislature. They have asked me what would it cost to do the system. For full air conditioning, the system, it's about a $1.3, $1.4 billion number. And that includes air conditioning many of those old, aging out infrastructure facilities in that process, which are very complicated to do. What we've done in our system as we've added air conditioning was prioritize the need. So we did our developmentally disabled population. We did our medical facilities were already air conditioned. But what we've done is added housing for our older inmates that have issues within the facility, and we have what we call a heat score system. So when an inmate comes in, they get assessed the very first day they come in for intake. If they have what's called a heat score, which means they have some medical vulnerability to heat, they immediately go to air-conditioned housing, and they're going to stay in air-conditioning housing as long as they have a heat score within the system. That's not ideal. Would it be easier if everything was already air-conditioned and you didn't have to do that? Yes, but in our situation, that's a way that we keep people safe, and we prevent heat-related deaths within the system. Because we have, back in 2011, 2011 was an exceptionally brutal summer for Texas, and we did have heat-related deaths in prison. And someone should not die from heat within a Texas prison. That's not something that should happen there. But at the same time, we now have strategies that we do to try to mitigate it, but again, a very difficult and, as you can imagine, very expensive piece that we do. But we have a wide variety of HVAC projects at any given time. We train inmates on HVAC to get their vocational through high school and college level and certifications, and then we put those with our teams that work on units so they continue to hone that skill so that they're easily employable when they get out. But that continues to be a challenge, but we continue to do what corrections people do is try to figure out how can we make it work with what we've got. And sometimes that is a barrier, as y'all know, because sometimes we're so good at that we don't get money to do the things we need to do. But at the same time, we do that and do it well, I think, and still have plans to continue. Our overall goal would be to get the system air conditioned, but as you can imagine, we have many other needs in the system, so we try to mitigate that with everything else that we do. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Director Collier. Secretary Issue, would you talk to us about North Carolina?
Well, good morning, everyone. I got to step back from that a little bit. That gets loud pretty quickly. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing the day with us as we, I think, try to look into the next 50 years of corrections in the United States and how can we improve. North Carolina, I come from a system, I'm in the process of retiring, as Steve said, still trying to learn how to do that. It's it's easy to talk about, but when you actually start doing it, it's really a pretty abrupt change. So, but I'm leaving a system. 32,000 is our offender population. About 19,000 employees. We've got a massive vacancy rate, as most jurisdictions across the country. About 37% of our correction officer positions are vacant. Budget-wise, we sit at about $2.1 billion per year. System encompasses 55 prisons. So our model is a little bit different than what I had been used to. I spent 3 decades in Ohio with Tony. Ohio had, the average size prison was probably about 2,000 beds, give or take. In North Carolina, our average size is probably more 800 to 900. So fewer smaller populations, but a lot more facilities. They span from Asheville, if you're familiar with our layout, all the way to the East Coast. Building-wise, really a big stretch. We've got a facility that has parts of it that were built in the late 1800s, and we have built some new units on the compound around that, but we've still got some late 1800s construction. Up to our newest facility was completed in 2012. So you can see a big span and a big challenge for our maintenance teams. We are in the middle of a master planning process that CGL is leading for us. But one of the things that we're learning and projecting is our deferred maintenance and capital needs are probably going to come in around $1.6 billion. So, we've got an aging system as many of the jurisdictions, or most of the jurisdictions. I know we saw some new construction there, but at least based on my experience, that's kind of the minority, and the majority is, we're dealing with the older stuff that Steve showed. A couple things we're doing to tackle this, in addition to master planning, we've signed in last year, or a couple years ago, I signed an energy performance contract. 6 of our facilities are in the midst of that. It's a $36 million project. But the good news is it's bringing a lot of new energy-wise equipment to us, and projected to save about $600,000 a year. It brought solar to North Carolina. We've got, I got there and started driving around the state, visiting all of our sites, and you see solar farms all over the place. And I said, how come we don't have one? Everybody said, well, I don't really know. But it took about 4 years, but we've got the final installation of a solar production project that's going to power up to about 50% of the prison down near, kind of near Myrtle Beach type area. Doing stuff with LED, just finishing that. We had started a campaign in early 23, LED in 23, so converting all of our lights. Brian talked about air conditioning. I'm going to talk about that, but we kind of had to do the LED because we got money for air conditioning, but we didn't get money for the air conditioning bill. So we're working really hard on that. But I know that we're today going to be searching for what does the next 50 years look like? What does construction look like that is going to be the home for our incarcerated population, but also the work site for hundreds of thousands of correction staff as we move forward. So as we go through, I thought of a couple things that I know are going to be, they were a part of Steve's thing, but going to be part of our thought process for today. Safety and technology is evolving rapidly. And I'm still in a system. We have a number of facilities that have armed gun towers. And, is that part of our formula over the next 50 years? Brian talked about stun fences, but there is a lot of perimeter technology that private companies are using, the federal government, our military are using to operate very secure locations with less of a drain on staff. So how can we leverage technology to keep the public safe, keep our staff safe, right? I joined North Carolina in the spring of 2019, and it was on the heels of 5 of our staff getting killed in 2 separate incidents in the same year. To give context to that, I was in Ohio for 3 decades and dealt with 5 employee murders in 30 years. North Carolina went through 5 in 1 year. So as you can imagine, that rocked the system and our staff, and still looms large, today. But technology, how can we reduce victimization? Victimization of our staff. We all have, unfortunately, terrible things happening to our staff and to some of the offenders. And can we explore all this neat new technologies out there to incorporate it into our process over the next 50 years? Staffing. Staffing is a challenge, I think, for everybody unless you're from California. Brian and I think we're in a CLA meeting, and who's got staffing issues, and everybody raised their hand except for California, who pays very, very well. So most of us are in the same boat. But how can, as we design and build and modify, how can we use that to be for a healthier environment for our staff, a more welcoming environment, a more comfortable environment? We talked about air conditioning, and does that have an impact on retention? I know in my state it does. Every summer, our rate of folks that say, I'm leaving, I can't stand it, it's too hot, goes up. And our staff wear protective type of body armor vest, and you get into a 95-degree day in the sun, and it's just very, very hot. So, how can, as we design prisons and units, how can we be more healthy for our staff, more accommodating, more welcoming than working in the picture you saw up here of Alcatraz, for example? So energy, I can give you some context in North Carolina. Our utility bills come in every year at about $50 million. So if it's $50 million in North Carolina, can you imagine what Texas's utility bills are? But as we talked about air conditioning, a lot of times when you get money for air conditioning, you don't get money to pay those utility bills. So we're constantly looking for ways, how can we conserve energy, be smarter with that for our budget, but also just for the good of the environment. Atmosphere, we saw a lot of that earlier. Atmosphere for the offenders who live in our prisons, and also for our staff who spend a big chunk of their lives and days in our prisons. I'm leaving a system that is about 80% air conditioned and will be completed in the summer of 2026. Little interesting story about air conditioning. So I arrived in North Carolina, and quickly heat was an issue. Summer was coming on, and the media was just pounding us about people cooking in prison and this, that, and the other. So I had engaged General Assembly, and we need money for air conditioning, and they said, nope, not happening. Didn't want to hear about it in the context of the offender population. We heard, that some folks have the view that that prison is not supposed to be comfortable. So came back, and I thought, man, is there another way to skin this cat? Went back, had some other meetings, and said, the air conditioning is for our staff. We have a recruitment problem. We have a retention problem. People won't come work for us because they know how hot it is, and you have to wear this protective vest. The minute I said it's for our staff, General Assembly came back and said, well, can we start you off with $60 million? Would that be okay? I said, yeah, that'd be pretty good. But it was just interesting how you talk through one lens, and it was a hard no, and then you talk through another lens, and it was very quickly turned into a yes. So, the air conditioning project is underway to support, both a healthy work environment for our staff and offenders. As we get in, artificial intelligence, right? How does that factor into our next 50-year plan? Because artificial intelligence can probably threaten our correctional operations in some ways, but it can also, I think, help us be a lot more efficient. You talk about the old man-down alarm system. I know when I started, you pushed a button and you had to call the control center and tell them where you were and that kind of stuff. And it's evolved now. You go to a local pharmacy, a CVS or Walgreens, and you shop. And I know a couple I've been into in Raleigh. They've got a camera monitor up there, and it's got a square around your face, and it's green, and they know exactly who's who and what's what and where's where. So how can technology help us as we move forward? But we appreciate time to spend with everybody, and I know that the day is going to, I hope, springboard our next decades as we are all looking to convert aging prison systems into prison systems of the future. And that's not an easy thing, because I know in my state, in North Carolina, the General Assembly has plans for the billions and billions of dollars, and they don't necessarily include building prisons or retrofitting prisons or modifying prisons. They're interested in spending money elsewhere. So it's a challenge, I think, for most jurisdictions. As we move into the future. Jails, same thing. I've toured jails in North Carolina. We've got our two oldest jails are late 1800s, and they're still operating. So can you imagine? I mean, you go into a building, and there's basically a steel box with four bunks inside of it, all the way up to very new, very modern, forward-thinking models. But in my state, the diversity of jails across the 100 counties is significant, from very, very old to very, very new and modern. And that's, a challenge for everybody. So I think I'm probably at my time limit, and I'm going to yield, but thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. What we'll do now is we'll hear from New York. then we'll hear from Georgia, and then Don Henry is going to put an exclamation point on all of it. Christy, you want to talk to us? You can sit there, or you can go to the podium.
Bear with me. I'm going to go grab my notes and then step up to the podium. Thank you for bearing with me. Everyone else brought cheat sheets, so I figured I should go grab mine and not try to memorize all this. Good morning, my name is Crystal. I'm the Director of Facilities Planning and Development with New York State Department of Corrections. I am representing Commissioner Marticello, who's very sorry he couldn't be at this event. Anybody who has had the honor of hearing Commissioner Marticello speak, I apologize because I am definitely not him. He does a much better job at representing our agency. I thought we were a fairly large system until I've heard some of the other speakers here. We have 44 facilities in New York State, 13 maximum security facilities, 26 mediums, 3 minimums. We also have 2 training facilities and a couple support facilities that we manage. Our inmate population right now is about 37,000. Staff between security and civilian staff, we have about 26,000. We are struggling with recruitment and retaining employees like it seems most agencies are at this point. I do manage the capital budget for the state. Our capital budget annually right now is about $563 million. Of that money, we have about $12 billion in reappropriations that continue to roll over. A lot of the stuff we are doing in New York State, well, I'll back up. We have, out of all of our facilities, we have geriatric facilities, which specialize in caring for our older population. We have mental health facilities. Within some of our facilities, we have regional health units, regional mental health units, lots and lots of programs, residential rehabilitation units, all sorts of stuff going on in New York State. As far as our construction, we are working on a lot of projects. Unfortunately, in New York State, there's a lot of unfunded mandates we're trying to deal with right now. There was a HALT Act that kind of changed the way we're doing corrections right now and caused us to rehabilitate a lot of our facilities, provide a lot of classroom space and congregate recreation space for our individuals that need to be in restricted housing programs. We don't have solitary confinement anymore, so I had to be careful not to throw that in there. We are currently working on a lot of energy upgrades. That's one of the big mandates in New York. We're doing window replacements, insulation improvements, upgrades to heating systems and ventilation systems in general, wastewater treatment upgrades, water plant upgrades, those kind of things. When it comes to air conditioning and providing conditioned space in our facilities, we do provide that in a lot of areas at this point. Obviously, our mental health areas, our medical areas, our visit areas are air conditioned. A lot of our program spaces air conditioned. The schools are air conditioned. It just provides for a more pleasant learning environment for our incarcerated and the staff working in those environments. We do not have fully air-conditioned facilities by any means. Our housing units are not conditioned. Our mess halls are not conditioned. A lot of our other spaces. Part of the issue we're running into with, in New York State, we have an extreme heat action committee that the governor put together. So air conditioning and extreme heat in general is becoming a hot topic.
We are looking at air conditioning some of those spaces as like the mess halls, like the housing units. Our facilities, our oldest facility in New York State right now is actually the oldest operating facility in the whole country. It is going to be 210 years old this year. Right behind that, Sing Sing Correctional Facility is going to be 200 years old. Our newest facility was completed in 1999, so that's getting pretty old itself. That is part of the big problem we're having. We have a lot of between 100 and 200-year-old facilities, which weren't made for data closets or electrical rooms. A lot of the new modern technologies are very hard to retrofit in those spaces. On top of that, we're facing the big builds we did in the late 80s and early 90s. A lot of those facilities are now reaching their end of useful life. So that's a big struggle we're facing in New York. On top of that, we're doing a lot of security improvements. We're trying to upgrade our perimeters with more modern technology. We're implementing CCTV systems, both fixed and body-worn camera systems, civilian duress systems. We have a lot of kitchen upgrades going on, energy upgrades, I already talked about that. One of the things we're also looking at is we're doing a study right now at our maximum security women's prison, Bedford Hills. We're doing a geothermal study to see about providing heat and cooling through geothermal. That's in the very early stages, so I don't have too much to share on that. We have 6 solar energy arrays that we've put in over the last 5 years. Let's see, what else do I have on here? Building new facilities in New York State doesn't look like it's going to be an option right now. Since 2011, we've closed 26 facilities. Our population is declining, so I don't see us building a brand new state-of-the-art prison. That would be great, but I don't see it in my future. So rehabbing these existing spaces is what we're looking at. That's all. Again, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Chris. Tony Turpin will talk about some of the Georgia experience.
I'm going to talk a little bit about Georgia, but I'm going to talk about some experiential things too. And I'm going to break it down and quickly go over my career through corrections, and I'll talk about air conditioning and conditions in facilities. In 1980, I started in corrections as a CO, first person they'd hired at the prison under the age of 21, the odds-on favorite of not going to survive. And this kid can't make it. And I had no intentions of staying, but now 45-something years later, here I am, still kicking around in this world. But as an officer, I remember those conditions vividly. The seasoned officers, when we'd go in the cell block with the big tiers, they'd say, "All right, Turpin, you're gonna get the top floor today," and it's 100 degrees outside. They were smart. The young kid could go upstairs and burn up while we down here, we try to make it. And then just the reverse opposite in the wintertime. Well, I'm going to go upstairs today. You got the bottom. We'd freeze to death down at the bottom. And you would look at the ways that you had to maneuver to just manage those facilities and the inmates within those facilities. And it's very true that officers that would, Secretary Ishii knows this, that officers would, when you left for the day, particularly in the summertime, you'd have to go home and you were just filthy from the hard work, the conditions in there as an officer, and the interactions that you had to have with inmates because of the heat and the weather. They could be tenuous at times because short tempers were a part of that environment. It's just the way it was. And your interactions with staff, your supervisors, and those kind of things. It was difficult, but we learned to manage and the ingenious ways of inmates to stay cool or to stay warm. You know, I'm never lost on the ingenuity that you find within the confines of a prison. And then as a warden, you know, we talked about ICE and all those things. That's another thing. As when you ran facilities or managed facilities, you had to find ways to manage a facility and keep it safe so that you wouldn't have the assaults and all the things that are inherent with conditions that are not conducive to comfort, as we said earlier. And more than just comfort, more of just actual being. So what would we do? We'd buy tons and tons of ice. We'd buy tons and tractor trailer loads of Gatorade or some kind of drink or something like that that you'd bring in. And so you could, you know, it was coercive that, all right, you're going to act good today. We're going to give you a whole lot of ice. We're going to give you a whole lot of Gatorade. We're going to give you some ice cream today. Something that you learn to find the ways to manage those facilities. And then, you know, the inmates again, if it were cold, how many times, you know, they would plug up the vent, or, you know, then you were always going around trying to have that, we called them, you know, they had a curtain up, you know, they'd cover the cell door, this, that, and the other, whatever way they could do. And it was a constant effort to manage that facility so that not only the staff, but those that are incarcerated, that we had some kind of symbiotic relation that we could survive. And so that and it still is. It's still that effort that wardens find themselves in, managing facilities today of things that you have to do to manage them effectively. And then, so, and I've done that, always issues with that. And then, so as now, I'm going to talk about maintaining facilities now, which is one of the things that we do. And you go in and you see facilities that have, I can't tell you the number of facilities that I go in that are not air conditioned. And they're not, and we talked about deferred maintenance. Director Green talked about the number and the amount of deferred maintenance. But how many facilities have you been in and you look and you see the ventilation fan is either not working or they haven't maintained it and it's clogged and it's dirty, and the vents, how many times have you changed the vents? How many times have you changed the filters? All those kind of things that cause problems with that type of system. And again, so the maintaining of those things is critical, is key. In Georgia, they're going through now. I mean, the commissioner is he's been testifying in front of the legislature, trying to get funding to make some changes in some of the facilities there. A lot of the facilities are not air conditioned. Some are, but some are not. And I think most of those were the ones that I worked in. Georgia State Prison, the Diagnostic Prison, all these huge prisons with major problems. But the efforts are there in trying to find the money to make the necessary changes to help the conditions of confinement. And maintenance is a key part of that. It's a key part of trying to keep the systems functioning. And I do see, I mean, not in every state, but you know, there is a challenge with, I think you know, the building boom. I see architects here that were all part of the building boom in the 80s, 70s, 80s. I think we're going to get to that at some point. I think some of the facilities, but the challenge is again, do you build what you've always built, or do you try to look at the pain points that agencies are dealing with today, such as staffing, conditions of confinement, because it not only does it affect the population, the incarcerated population, but the staff. So there's a challenge now for folks to look at how do we design something that meets the needs, that keeps the public safe, but also creates another positive situation within the community. So the challenge is out there. It's real, and it's going to be interesting to see how the next 10 years, what kind of changes that brings about. That's what I've got.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. All right. Don, will you wrap us up here, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. So, all yours.
Thank you, Steve. Everybody brought up a lot of interesting aspects. We're all dealing with older facilities. And as design professionals, we all love designing new facilities. Start with a clean slate, come up with a beautiful building. Conditions are really optimal as we design them. Our facilities, we have a few slides. Let's go to the next slide. The green button, there we go. So many of our facilities are, and we take back. We're talking about older facilities here, declining populations. So many of our agencies, we're not building new buildings. We need to maintain our existing housing stock, our existing infrastructure in there. So really what we need to look at, and as a design professional I look at, is how to take advantage of an older building. What are the advantages that these buildings provide us? There's a lot of strengths that are in these older facilities that we can take them. Yes, they're secure, but there are other aspects of them that can really take care of them. How do we use, a lot of them are heavy masonry, and they're big, heavy structures. That represents a gigantic thermal flywheel, an ability to moderate the temperatures that are inside our facilities. So, basic solar engineering is bring in the heat during the daytime, allow those walls to warm up, and then let them release the heat in the evening when it's cooler. So are the ways that we can, so how do we use our existing facilities to our advantage to do that? How do we modernize our facilities? Some of our talks later on, Bridge will talk about how do we utilize all these facilities? We have a lot of older systems that are inside our facility. How do we leverage those to bring in our new IT systems, our new communication systems? There's a lot of digital communication to bring a level of not comfort so much, but peace of mind to each of our people in custody. So how do we bring that to its advantage? So I just want to share a couple examples of ideas with you before we break to our talk. On the next, our typical facilities, large, spread out, huge roof areas everywhere. There's a real opportunity here. Obviously, as the buildings age out, we need to replace the roofs. When we replace the roofs and we face it legally with our new building codes, let's address the energy code. Let's insulate our rooftop. Let's turn them into something special and bring insulation to lower your energy costs because you're reflecting that heat away and not absorbing all that heat, so you're not dealing with all that heat in the summer. Take advantage of PV. Utilize that. That's free energy to you. It's going to help your budget and bring down the cost of running your facilities. And green roofs are out there also, and they can provide also just storage of water, dealing with the stormwater issues in there, but also it starts to bring green to your facilities. And so for housing units to overlook a green roof, it's rather a nice, pleasant thing. These old heavy masonry buildings. If we look at them and reclad them, put insulation around the outside, now you're taking advantage of that thermal flywheel and really bringing something special to it. Replace your windows. Window replacement is a big thing. This is a facility that we worked on in Puerto Rico, the Bayamon Correctional Medical Center. It's a new ground-up building, but we took advantage of the thermal flywheel in there. We have it heavily insulated. You're in Puerto Rico. It's a tremendous amount of heat that's there, high humidity. If we were lucky enough to air condition the building, and so that was fully air conditioned, but what we did is we recognized where we were. We're in Puerto Rico, we're right in Hurricane Alley, and so the systems that we built into that facility were completely redundant. We had redundant air handler systems. Each air handler system had redundant motors and belts in them, so when things break down over time, as we know, there and available. We had water cisterns, we had dualized generators. The end result of the investment in that facility, Hurricane Maria came around, the entire island was shut down. That facility was up and operational all the way through, never went down. So it's planning ahead, being innovative, try and think outside the box a little bit, take advantage of what you have. You have an asset, let's use it to the best advantage we can. The last is a thought, and Director Green brought it up, is how do we think outside the box? And he's contemplating ductwork and how do we enclose that. During our talks together, we talked about innovation that may come from overseas. Our classic day rooms, the old railroad style linear jails, double height spaces, places where air is stratified. It's hotter at the top, cooler at the bottom. The same with our more modern facilities. We always have these taller spaces in there. So how do we take advantage of those? Well, use the circulation to run air through. Wind catchers, which come from the Middle East, are an age-old system that doesn't require any mechanical fans or anything. They just naturally use convection to bring cooler air blowing from the prevailing winds down and into your facility, allowing you to exit the hot air out. And you're not buying air conditioning. Here's another view of how they can work. It's a vertical stack. It's faceted so that cold air can come down, the warm air comes back out. Now you're beginning to control your environment and keep it cooler. There are modern versions of it being built right now in the Middle East, where they cool an entire office building. The airport in Dubai is utilizing it. There are all sorts of ways to do this. You see how they took great advantage of both solar, the wind catchers, and a variety of ways to just really control the environment, deal with our conditions of confinement, but it's not just conditions of confinement for the people in custody, but it's also our staff. They're there 24/7. They deserve to work in a reasonable environment also. So, in closing, work with what we have, think outside the box, and we'll come up with solutions that will help us solve these problems, but help manage our budgets also at the same time.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you. Look, we've got a few minutes before the break here. I appreciate the panel keeping us on our time here. We want to make sure you do get a break before Dr. Timmy speaks. But any of you here have a point, question, representing any other state or representing the professional community that you'd like to pose to the panel or make a comment about what you're doing? All right, I warned you. Then, let me ask a basic question to the panel here. 4 different states really represented here today. Is there anything that ACA can do through its mechanisms, largely the standards that we develop, that would help it out, or is it all a state's issue? Brian, I'll start with you on Texas side of it.
So, thank you. No, I think there are some ways ACA through standards can help address it. I think the devil's in the details and how far you go. If ACA established a temperature, I think that could be an issue for many states. But I think what a state has a responsibility to do is to mitigate temperatures that you're dealing with. You can't necessarily go out and air condition everything you have, but as a responsible correctional entity and being professionals, we're all taking steps to try to help our population deal with the reality of where we are at the time in their facility. And I think making sure that systems are doing those steps is critical, I think, to making sure that you keep your population safe. And that that population is able to thrive within the environment that you have. So I think
Yeah.
looking at those type things, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, I'll come back on it. Todd, how about from your perspective there?
I think that, I've spent, unfortunately, a lot of time in federal court, and I have, I've witnessed the standards speak very loudly, garner a great deal of respect from the federal court systems and judges. I think that each of our state legislatures are unique and have unique spending preferences, depending on kind of where you're situated in the country and who's the power, the party in power. But I think the standards can help push progress. So, I think that if there's the opportunity to have the standards help move our profession forward, it would influence state lawmakers and court systems. I think it's probably got to be steady and gradual, not really abrupt, because the speed of state government and the federal government doesn't move at the private sector pace usually. But I think, progressing strategically the standards is going to help move the needle for the better in the future.
Yeah, okay. How about in Georgia, Tony? Would it help? I mean, I know what Georgia's going through now.
Well, absolutely. Again, though, as Todd and Brian said, the standards are certainly recognized in the courts, and that is a tool that can be used. But as in any correctional environment, it's a strategic plan, and what's the end goal? What do you want to ultimately achieve? And I think that ACA has the bully pulpit. They have the ability, if they strategically, which I think they're doing, move with input from stakeholders of how do you gradually move to that end goal, and let the standards help drive that. I think that commissioners, secretaries, directors could lean on that to help achieve that final outcome.
How about New York, Chrissy? Standards helpful or not?
I do think it would help work with our policymakers a little more on driving the importance of this home. I do think it's also a long process to undertake, and I'd worry about, not being able to meet standards within my state in particular.
Do the legislators or the governor's office, do they ever even say, are you in compliance with what ACA, what do they use as a measuring stick to say whether you're meeting basic standards? Do they even care?
I think and I'll not speak for our legislature, but if, let's say ACA said every facility in the country's got to be air conditioned, my state could tell me, get out of ACA. I don't think they would, but I think that flip, you deal with the conservative side of how that looks, but I think they look at federal courts and what federal courts are mandating, and those conditions really drive probably what you have to do. And unfortunately in corrections, many times we get what we have to do versus what we would like to do. So I think being compliant, being fully accredited, we're a Golden Eagle state, we're fully accredited, we're very proud of that, and we tout that, but I guess making sure that from their end they know that, but at the same time they don't dig into those standards too much.
That's a good point. Don, I let you wrap it up here. The ACA has looked at performance-based standards. They've looked at specific metric-driven standards in there. They're out there. From the design community side of it, I know you'd like to have specific guidelines to go on. Yes, if I need so many air exchanges per hour, I'll design for that. But what's your general take on where ACA could be most valuable in promoting a better environment?
Well, I think the basic standards really give you a nice outline of what the scale of our facilities are and what we're talking about, minimum areas, talking about daylight bringing in. But I do think we could expand a little bit in talking about it, because ventilation is an important aspect of comfort and being in there. And the story about filters being clogged and Many years ago as a young professional, I was asked to go over and inspect a building, and they said, oh, well, the kitchen is terrible, and we have to replace the hood and take everything out. We went over and inspected. The filters were clogged solid. The fan belts were broken. We went into a box over in the corner, found the fan belts, put the fan belts back on, and the whole thing turned back on. So I constructively worked myself out of a design fee.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's really about, if you set some standards that are not onerous, but really talk about the ventilation aspects of it, it starts to bring that back in. We're talking about conditions of confinement. We're also talking about the health of our people who are in custody and our staff there.
Yeah.
And we know good ventilation gives us a healthier environment. And so simple things like that can really help. And if that's just kind of a minimum standard, it starts to get us on that direction of our evolving spaces.
Well, there's a lot for us to do. We said that at the outset. The director, Green, said it at the outset. We have a long ways to go. But I do think that the Planning and Design Committee, under your leadership and under Tony's leadership and the many of you that are here, I think we can begin to establish some ways. Maybe it's just the evidence basis side of it. Maybe that's a focus for us to say what's happening elsewhere that cumulatively might be able to provide states and counties with some relief. Thank you very much for staying with us. Thank you, panel, for your insights on it. And Tony, I'll give it to you. I think we're ready for a break.
Yes.